Good morning, students. Welcome back to online class. Are you fine, students? I hope you all are fine and safe. Students, now we are learning economics part. Is it? From economics part, which lesson now we are learning? Have you remember, students? Very good. Now we are learning economics lesson 2, globalization and trade. From this lesson, first of all, we learned about what is meant by globalization and what is meant by trade. Now I am going to ask one question to you. What is meant by globalization? Very good. Globalization is the process of interaction and integration among people, companies and governments in worldwide. Next we learned about trade. What is meant by trade? Excellent. Trade means to buy and sell goods and services. Okay. Then in modern days, this liberalization, privatization and globalization, these three things have become much talk of subject among politicians, economists and businessmen. Is it? Among them, the most important one is globalization. Globalization, it is one of the supporting pillar of economic condition. Is it? Mainly, the globalization means the free flow of goods and services, technology, capital and labor. Is it? From this lesson, first we learned about the history of globalization. Students, now I am going to ask one question. Who introduced the term globalization? Very good. Professor Theodore Levitt introduced the term globalization. Who introduced the term globalization, students? Professor Theodore Levitt. Is it? Then, the globalization can be classified into how many stages? Very good. 3 stages. What are the 3 stages, students? Archaic globalization, proto-globalization, modern globalization. Archaic globalization. What is meant by archaic globalization? In early form of globalized economics and culture is known as archaic globalization. Okay, early period globalization. Archaic globalization means early form of globalization. Okay, then this archaic globalization is rise before 16th century. Archaic globalization is rise before 16th century. In this period, for the purpose of trade and commercial centers of Middle East and China, they constructed Silk Road and Spices Road. Is it? They constructed Silk Road and Spices Road. Why they constructed Silk and Spices Road? Through that roads, they import and export silk and spices. Through that roads, they import and export silk and spices. So that particular roads get the name Silk Road and Spices Road. Okay. Then, secondly, we learned about proto-globalization. Is it? The second phase is proto-globalization. It was rise in which century, students? 16th and 17th centuries. Is it? 16th and 17th centuries. In this time, the British East India Company was founded. Very, very important one word question, is it? In which year the British East India Company was founded? 1600. Then this company established the first Dutch East India Company. Is it? In which year, students? 1602. Is it? Then thirdly, we learned about modern globalization. Thirdly, we learned about modern globalization. In which century the modern globalization was rise, students? Very good. In the centuries of 19th century, the modern globalization was rise. Okay. Then, in 19th and 20th century, some of the differences came between globalization. The first changes is the global trade in the country as well as capital, investment and economic also increased. Economic condition also increased. Then the second important change is in the 19th and 20th century shows the higher share of trade, merchants production, growth of trade in services, rise of production and trade, by multinational firms. These all production were increased through multinational firm. Firm means companies. Firms means companies. Okay. These are the things we learned in previous class. Okay, students. Now let us come forward to today's class. Okay, today I am going to teach traders in South India historical perspective. Listen very careful, students. The next topic is traders in South India historical perspective. Okay, listen, students. The South Indian trade were formed by merchants. The South Indian trade were formed by merchants. Why they formed the South Indian trade? To organize and expand their trading activities. For the purpose of expanding their trading activities, the merchants formed the South Indian trade. Because of trade, the Indian culture was exported to other land. Listen very careful. Because of trade, the Indian culture was exported to other land also. That means because of trade, the people move from one state to other state or one country to other country. In that time, they spread their culture to other areas. They spread their culture to other areas. Okay. Then in 1053 AD, the Kalinga traders brought red-colored stone and cotton textiles to Southeast Asia. In 1053 AD, the Kalinga traders, they brought some of the things for mainly red-colored stone and cotton textiles. That things they brought to Southeast Asia. And also in early days, some countries contact the South Indian traders. Some country traders contact the South Indian traders. Now I am going to explain which are the countries traders contact to South India by trade. Okay, now I am going to explain which are the countries traders are contact to South India by trade. Okay, in a book, some of the important countries traders given. First one is European traders, the second one is Portuguese, third one is Dutch, fourth one is British, then the fifth one is Danes, and the sixth one is the French. There are 6 countries traders mainly contact by trade to South India. Okay. Now I am going to explain one by one. The first one is European traders. The first one is European traders. The European traders, they contact South India by trade. Okay. Now listen here. During the period of 1053 AD, for the purpose of trade, various European traders came to India. Listen very carefully. During the period of 1053 AD, for the purpose of trade, that means many European traders came to India for economic activities. Why the European traders came to India? For the purpose of economic activities. Okay. At that time, they discovered many sea routes. Okay, at that time, they discovered many sea routes. For example, Vasco da Gama discovered the new sea route from Europe to India. Now, see the picture, students. Vasco da Gama, who discovered the new sea route from Europe to India in the way of Cape of Good Hope. In which way, students? In the way of Cape of Good Hope. Okay, through that route, he reaching in the civilized world. Through that route, in which route? In the sea route from Europe to India. Through that route, he reaching on the civilized world. Okay. Then the second one is the Portuguese. The second one is the Portuguese. The Portuguese, under the leadership of Vasco da Gama, landed at Calicut on May 1498. Listen very careful, students. The Portuguese, under the leadership of Vasco da Gama, he landed at Calicut on May 1498. See the map, students. He came the route through landed at Calicut on 1498. She landed in this route. Okay, map showing no in this route. Okay, then and also, secondly, Vasco da Gama came to India in 1502 for the establishment of trading station at Calicut, Cochin and Kannanur also. Cochin, it was the early capital of the Portuguese in India. Okay. Then the third one is the Dutch. The third one is the Dutch. Okay. The Dutch formed the East India Company in the year 1602. The Dutch formed the East India Company in the year 1602. In the previous class, we learned about the East India Company was founded in the year 1600. Is it? Then when the Dutch came by South India for trade, that time he formed the East India Company in the year 1602. Okay. Then in 1605, Admiral van der Hagen, he established Dutch factory at Masulipatinam, Petrapoli, Devanapattinam, etc. Listen very careful, students. In 1605, Admiral van der Hagen. Did you see the picture, students? He is Admiral van der Hagen. Okay. In 1605, he established Dutch factory at Masulipatinam, Petrapoli, Devanapattinam, etc. Okay. Then in 1610, the king of Chandragiri found another factory at Pulicat. 1610, the king of Chandragiri found another factory at Pulicat. Some of the things are exported by Dutch. The important things were indigo and Bengal raw silk. Okay. Then Pulicat was the headquarters of the Dutch in India. Pulicat is the headquarter of Dutch in India. Okay. Then the fourth one is the British. The fourth one is the British. Listen very careful, students. On 31st December 1600, Queen Elizabeth granted charter to the East India Company. On 31st December 1600, Queen Elizabeth granted charter to the East India Company. On the southeastern coast, the English established Masulipatinam in 1611 near Pulicat. Okay. Then in 1632, the Sultan of Golconda granted the English, they were allowed to trade freely in their kingdom ports. Listen very careful, students. In 1632, the Sultan of Golconda, they granted the English people, they were allowed to trade freely in their kingdom ports. Then in 1639, they built a factory in Madras that is known as Fort St. George. In 1639, they built a factory in Madras. Okay, did you see the picture, students? This is known as Fort St. George. Okay, in which year this Fort St. George was built? 1639. Okay, in 1639, the Britishers constructed this fort at Chennai. Okay, it is called Fort of St. George. Okay, soonly it is displaced Masulipatinam. This fort is soonly displaced at Masulipatinam. Okay, then the fifth one is the Danes. The fifth one is the Danes. The Danes formed an East India Company in 1616. The Danes formed an East India Company in 1616. Then in 1620, the Danish settlements were established at Tranquebar. Tranquebar, it is in Tamil Nadu. Okay, in 1620, the Danish settlements were established at Tranquebar. It is in Tamil Nadu. It is the headquarter of Danes in India. It is the headquarter of Danes in India. But its strength is failed. Few years only it was in the headquarter of Danes, but later its strength is failed. So in 1845 they forced to sell their settlement to the British. But its strength is failed. So in 1845 they forced to sell their settlement to the British. Okay. Then the last one is the French. The last one is the French. Listen here, students. The first French factory in India was established in the year 1668 by the permission of the Sultan of Golconda. The first French factory in India, it was established in the year 1668 by the permission of Sultan of Golconda. But in 1693, the Dutch captured Pondicherry, but it handed back to French. In 1693, the Dutch captured Pondicherry and handed back to French. So, in 1701, Pondicherry became the headquarters of the French. So, in 1701, Pondicherry became the headquarters of the French. Okay, students. Then, the next topic is globalization in India. The next topic is globalization in India. Listen very careful, students. In India, the period of 1980 to 81 was marked by severe balance of payment. That means monetary transaction was happened in this period. Okay, in the period of 1980 to 81, it was marked by severe balance of payment difficulties. That means monetary transaction was came due to hike in oil price. Hike means increase. Okay, increasing the oil price and Gulf of War in 1990 to 91 gives some difficulties through Indian traders. Listen very careful, students. In India, the period of 1980 to 81 is marked severe balance of payment difficulties. That means that a monetary transaction was happened. Then during 1990 to 91, the Gulf War was happened. So because of that, the increasing the oil price were increased, and also some of the difficulties also came through Indian traders. Okay, in the areas of Indian traders. Then, when the new government took over in June 1991, India had unprecedented for balance of payment crisis. Unprecedented for balance of payment. That means faced many difficulties. India had faced many difficulties through monetary transaction. Okay, in the balance of payment, that means monetary transaction. Then, with the downgrading India's credit rate by some international agencies, with the downgrading means reducing. Okay, with the reducing of India's credit rate by some international agencies, heavy capital went out to India. Okay, because reducing India's credit rate. Okay, through some international agencies, India's credit rate is reduced. So, heavy capital went out to India. Capital means money. Okay. So, India lost its credit worthiness in the international market. So, the government mortgaged means borrow. The government mortgaged 40 tons of gold to the Bank of England. Listen very careful, students. During the Gulf War, the Indian economic condition get some of the difficulties. So, the Indian government mortgaged means borrow. The Indian government borrowed 40 tons of gold to the Bank of England. Okay, so in 1991 to 92, our government implemented economic policy through globalization, liberalization and privatization. Listen very careful, students. In 1990 to 91, because of Gulf War, our Indian government faced so many difficulties through economic condition. That means the economic condition came very bad condition. So because of that, the Indian government borrowed 40 tons of gold to the Bank of England. So because of that, the Indian government need to improve the economic condition. So in 1991 to 92, our government implemented economic policy through globalization, liberalization and privatization. Okay, it is called new economic policy. It is called new economic policy. Listen very careful, students. The new economic policy was formed in the year 1991. Important one-word question. Okay, 1991. Then, for the strengthening of this policy, India signed one of the draft that is called Dunkel Draft. For the strengthening of this policy, India signed one of the draft that is called Dunkel Draft. It was signed in the year 1994. The Dunkel Draft is signed in the year 1994. Okay, can you understand, students? Okay, next I am going to teach reforms made to adapt globalization. From new economic policy in India, some of the reforms were made through globalization. Now I am going to explain that reforms. Okay, important question answer. Listen very careful. The first point is abolition of industrial licensing except for the few industries. That means many industries license were they abolished. Many industries license were they abolished. Okay, only few industries license were they nationalized, and most of the industries license were they abolished. Then the second point is reduction in the number of industries reserved for public sector. That means they reduced many industries from public sector. Okay, from public sector they reduced so many industries. Then third one is fixation of a realistic exchange rate of rupee to exchange exports in Indian government. They fix the real exchange rate of rupee. That means they export some of the goods items. So that particular goods items they fix some of the amount, real amount. They fixed the real amount. Okay. Then the fourth one is foreign private sector by making rupee convertible on trade on current account and by reducing import duties. Foreign private sector they making rupee convertible, that means they changed to on trade on current account and reducing import duties. They reduced the import duties. Okay. Then the fifth one is foreign exchanges regulation were suitably amended. They regulate some of the foreign exchanges. Okay. Then the last one is the statutory liquidity ratio was reduced to increase lending by RBI. The statutory liquidity ratio SLR, the abbreviation of SLR is the statutory liquidity ratio. Okay, it was reduced to increase lending by RBI. Lending means giving money paid for alternate for some areas. Okay, after some days. Giving money paid for after some days through RBI. RBI means Indian Reserve Bank. Through Indian Reserve Bank. Okay. Students, can you understand? Now shall we recall the points, students? Students, now we learned about the South Indian traders. Is it? The South Indian trade were formed by merchants. Very good. The South Indian trade were formed by merchants. For what purpose they formed this South Indian trade? To expand their trading activities. Is it? To expand their trading activities. In 1053 AD, the Kalinga traders brought red-colored stone and cotton textile to Southeast Asia. Is it? Then, from this class, first of all, we learned about some of the countries' traders are contact to South India by trade. Okay. Now, I am going to recall a few important points about each country's traders. The first one is European traders. Is it? First one is European traders. During the period of 1053 AD, European traders came to India during the period of 1053 AD. Why they came to India? For the purpose of trade. Is it? For the purpose of trade. Many European traders came to India for economic activities. At that time, they discovered many sea routes. Mostly one of the important person who is Vasco da Gama, he discovered the new sea route from Europe to India in the way of Cape of Good Hope. Is it? Through that route, he reaching on the civilized world. Okay, then that way so many traders are came to South India and they contact trade between India and that countries. Then the next one is the Portuguese. The Portuguese under the leadership of Vasco da Gama, he landed at Calicut on May 1498. Portuguese under leadership of Vasco da Gama, they landed at Calicut. Okay, they landed at Calicut in the year 1948. Okay. Then, thirdly, we learned about the Dutch. Thirdly, we learned about the Dutch. The Dutch formed the East India Company, is it? The Dutch formed the East India Company in India. In which year they formed the East India Company? Very good, 1602. The East India Company was formed in 1600. That difference you want to understand, students. The East India Company formed 1600 AD, but the Dutch East India Company was formed in the year 1602. Okay, East India Company was formed in 1600. Dutch East India Company was formed in 1602. Okay, then in 1605, Admiral van der Hagen. Okay, Admiral van den Hagen, he established Dutch factory at Masulipatnam, Petrapoli, Devanapattinam, etc. Okay, then next we learned about the Britishers, the British traders, is it? On 31st December 1600, Queen Elizabeth granted charter to the East India Company. Who granted charter to East India Company? Queen Elizabeth. Okay, Queen Elizabeth granted charter to the East India Company in the year 1600, 31st December. Okay, then in 1639, they built a factory in Madras that is known as Fort St. George. Okay, in 1639, they built, that means the Britishers built a factory in Madras that is known as Fort at St. George. Okay, Fort at St. George. Fort in St. George. Okay, that fort name is St. George. Then next we learned about the Danes. The Danes formed an East India Company in 1616. The Dutch formed the East India Company in 1602. Then the Danes formed the East India Company in the year 1616. Okay. Then 1620, the Danish settlement was established at Tranquebar in Tamil Nadu. It is the headquarters of Danes in India. But its strength is failed, is it? Its strength is failed. So, in 1845, they forced to sell their settlement to the Britishers. Okay. Then the next traders are the French traders. Next one is the French traders. The first French factory in India was established in the year 1668. The first French factory in India was established in the year 1668 by the permission of Sultan of Golconda. Okay, but in 1693, the Dutch captured Pondicherry and it handed back to the French. Then 1701, Pondicherry became the headquarters of the French. Okay, then students, next we learned about globalization in India. Next we learned about globalization in India. From this topic we learned about some of the difficulties, that means some of the problems came through in the areas of our Indian economy. Is it? Why some of the difficulties came in the areas of Indian economy? Because of Gulf War, is it? Because of Gulf War, and also in 1980 to 81, some of the monetary transactions, some of the problems came, and also 1990 to 91, the Gulf War was happened. Through that war period, the oil price were increased, and some other all the goods items rates were increased. Okay, prices were increased. So the economic condition came very bad condition. Then, so because of that, our government introduced the new economic policy. Why our government introduced the new economic policy? Because of the economic conditions weakness, our government borrow 40 tons of gold to the Bank of England. Is it 40 tons of gold borrow from the Bank of England? So, our government introduced the new economic policy in the year 1991. Okay, for the strengthening of this policy, India signed Dangal Draft in 1994. Okay, important one word question, Dangal Draft. It is signed in the year 1994. Then finally, we learned about the reforms made to adopt globalization. The reforms made to adopt globalization. From here, 6 points we learned. Is it? The first one is abolition of industrial licensing except for a few industries. Except for a few industries, remaining all the industries license were abolished. Okay. Then reduce the number of industries. The number of industries were reduced. Then thirdly, fixation of realistic exchange rate of rupee to exchange exports of Indian goods. That means from export, they fixed some real amount, okay, real exchange rate. Fixed the real exchange rate from export areas. Then fourth one is foreign private sector by making rupee convertible on trade on current account and by reducing import duties. They change some of the private trade sectors and also they reduce the import duties also. Okay. Then fifth one is foreign exchanges were regulated. The foreign exchanges were regulated. Finally, we learned about the statutory liquidity ratio was reduced to increase lending by RBI. Lending, giving money paid for after some time. Okay. Who give the money? RBI. RBI means Indian Reserve Bank. Okay, to improve the economic condition, the Indian Reserve Bank provide money. That money was paid for after some days. Okay, these are the things we learned from these reforms made to adapt globalization. Students, the continuation of this lesson I will teach the next class. Now, Allah take a book, turn exercises page, page number 310, page number 310, page number 310, fourth, Roman number 4, give short answers. From there, fourth question, what are the reforms made to adapt globalization? What are the reforms made to adapt globalization? Okay, turn page number 305 and 6. Answer is page number 305 and 6. Page number 305, reforms made to adopt globalization heading. There 3 points and the next page 3 points. So totally 6 points are there, is it? That 6 points you should mark. That 6 points you have to mark. Okay. And also some one word question you have to mark. The first one is page number 305. First one is page number 305. 305. The Dutch heading. The Dutch heading. The Dutch East India Company was founded in the year 1602. You underline it. The Dutch East India Company was formed 1602. Then the British heading, 31st December 1600, Queen Elizabeth granted charter to the East India Company. Underline it. Then the Danes heading, the Danes formed an East India Company in the year 1616. Underline it. 1616. Then the French heading, the first French factory in India was established in the year 1668. Underline it. 1668. Then in 1693, the Dutch captured Pondicherry. 1693, underline it. 1693, the Dutch captured Pondicherry. Underline it. Then Pondicherry was headquarters of the French. In 1701, underline it. In 1701, Pondicherry was the headquarters of the French. Students, likewise, each line by line, you will read and you prepare the one book inside one word question. Okay. The continuation of this lesson I will teach the next class. We will meet the next class. Thank you, students.